Greetings, Clausewitz here. So in this What Means videos, I want to explain certain terms in military history or even military in general, but I also want to suggest better definitions, or precisely saying what I consider a better definition of those words, if appropriate. So if there's a term out there which is defined and where I'm also like okay with, or where I agree on, then I will use it also. I will explain it here and then also state in any case, if I should suggest a better version or not, that how I will actually use this term from now on. So when I make like a video about an army again, and then I use terms I discussed in those What Means videos, then I will use the definition of the meaning I declared in here. I'm doing this mainly because in the like historic communities, so basically people who are interested in history in any sorts, not only military, and also in communities like specifically the HEMA community, there's often this big mess of terms, of words, used for specific weapons or troops or whatever. Because some people want to use the original term in their original meaning. Of course they have to discuss which meaning they want to use, because there were different meanings out there for the same word, because language change. And then there are also people who want to use original terms but reapply them with a new meaning. And then there are people just creating new terms, and some people do all of three of this or two of this. And therefore this just creates a lot of confusion. So I basically want to bring order and understanding into this, hopefully, and therefore reduce the confusion, and that at least we hear on my channel now or what we are talking about. Because this is the reason why I declare those specific terms I'm discussing here, that you know, even if you not fully agree with my definition, if I suggest another one, I have to say here, spoiler alert, I will suggest often, or I think in every case I will suggest like a different meaning. But the point is, you will know then, okay, when Clausewitz is saying those terms, I know what he's meaning, and we can discuss on that. And this is what this is for here. And of course I will make arguments why I make a suggestion for a different word or whatever. Also a quick note, this video here will have a German version. The link will then be here, and I do this just because I thought about making German videos. I have a German speaking audience, and I get actually requests like, oh, could you make a video also in German? And it's about language and terms here, and basically the same problems in English are almost identically in German, as far as I can tell, maybe even more languages. But the point is, of course, I can make it in English and German, and therefore I will do this in here because it's fitting and not so much additional work for it. This doesn't mean I will just now going like both languages all the time, or make more German videos, or just like special German videos. No, I will stay English, and basically some of my content which I make anyway, some of it I will make a German version of it, and but just if I see it's fit, or if I know okay I can do this easily without making like double of the work or the triple of the work even. So just that you know, and if you're like interested more in this version, if you have trouble with English, or actually you're like new to my channel, okay, then you may be not understanding what I'm saying here. It's maybe pointless, but this is also the reason why I did this. So because I know I have like big traffic out of Germany, for example, specifically, and but they don't watch, and therefore I thought maybe I catch some people who are basically interested in military or so, and maybe just not dare to dive more into international content, and yeah, we'll see how this works out. So in this video here, I want to talk about the modern term heavy infantry. This term is mostly used for the time before, like early modern era warfare. So basically from the 17th century on, the term heavy infantry is lesser and lesser used, and basically line infantry takes over, and this is a topic for another video. So just to like make clear about what we're talking here, in this case here about heavy infantry. Infantry means just something like foot soldier. So really somebody who is fighting on his feet literally without the help of an animal, like he's not riding a horse or a camel, and he's not using a vehicle, for example like a siege engine, or maybe even later when we have like more motorized things, but this would then don't consider anymore like Middle Ages or classical terms. But like I said, if they used like a wooden construct in any form, this wouldn't also be not infantry anymore. So we now know what infantry means, and this is pretty easy actually. But now we have this word heavy in addition to it, and this is basically the important part here. So what can heavy mean? Basically, the word heavy itself, it can mean like a high amount of weight or mass. It can also mean intense or difficult. So what has it to do here with the infantry in a military sense? The funny thing is actually there is no official definition out there about heavy infantry. There is an official definition about infantry, and about heavy you found those words in different dictionaries, but you won't find heavy infantry. It could be that somewhere it is, and you can point out to me, but the best thing I could find were a Wikipedia page about it, but this had no sources, really not one. And you see like in Wikipedia articles, for example, that if there is some military history stuff or so, they actually use the term heavy infantry, but don't really stating what this means in any way. Of course, it leads often to this page where there is a description or a definition, but without any claim. And of course, I will also actually criticize the explanation there, but this will be later. So in general, we have, as it seems, like two definitions out there about heavy infantry, what people usually use or refer to, often without actually explaining any of it. So it's really just people just claiming stuff. The point is, like I mentioned before, what mostly is based also in Wikipedia is that it is equipment based. The term heavy here is described the equipment of the infantry. On the other side, suggesting or claiming that actually when historians, or many historians, use the term heavy infantry, they are referring to infantry which would fight in tight formation, like opposing to light infantry in loose formation. I have to say I disagree with both of them completely. So let's first look at the whole tight formation argument or claim. The point is, the first thing that strikes me is how do we like set the math, not the math, but how do we draw the line between loose and tight? What means the tight formation actually? Is it if I am like shoulder to shoulder to the other guys? Is it if we have like some space around it, but we stand fairly close to each other? Not like I can like extend the half of my arm. Is this still close? Is this still tight, or is this already loose? You see, so I have here this problem first, because if we think about many troops, we are actually like just describing them as heavy infantry, for example, men at arms or knights on foot. They don't really fight like shoulder on shoulder. They wouldn't fight in a formation like phalangites or mercenaries, as like German and Swiss mercenaries in late Middle Ages, because they used weapons like pole axes, or they used like their arming and long swords, stuff like this, which are not like short weapons, and they wouldn't like fight really tight, but also not with 5, 6, 7 meters between each other. So this is what I say. How do we define now tight? And also, does it include the depth of the formation? Because a shield wall, like a typical Anglo-Saxon shield wall, is more like a line with those overlapping shields, and not a block like, for example, a phalanx or phalangites, Macedonian phalanx, where they have actually many ranks behind them. So this is too confusing. It doesn't state, it's not precisely enough to use it as a description. Like when I say infantry, tight formation, you don't have really good picture, because it can actually mean different things, and you're not sure anymore. If you look at a unit, a troop, kind of troops, like the type of formation, we would then ask, okay, is this now tight or not? So it's too much room for interpretation there. But the even bigger problem with that is to define the troops on their tight or loose formation is that it's just pointless. You don't get anything of it, because the tightness of the formation doesn't determine how they would perform, or which combat role they would actually have to do on the battlefield, which tasks they would do, and so on. Okay, it's definitely an indicator and a factor, but also many other factors. So it's not like you would say, okay, tight formation means like anti-cavalry, binding the enemy, flanking the enemy, whatever. You can't really see that just when you hear tight formation. Just give you like the example. If I would present you an army, you haven't heard of it before. So you don't know how it works. I want to like explain it to you, but of course not over like 20 hours or so. But I want to give you a good idea how it works. So I will say to you like, okay, those guys here is heavy infantry. And you were then like, if you go with the premise of the tight formation, you were like, oh, okay, this means they would fight in tight formation, alright. But what is their purpose? You can't really know, like I said, just for tight formation. So then I would reply, oh yeah, okay, those guys here took like two-handed axes and swords and would charge at the enemy and would then try to break them in a very short time. You then, okay, this makes clear, okay. So then we're going to another army. You also not heard of much before, and I'm like, okay, here, this guy is in this case heavy infantry. You would be like, oh, okay, so in tight formation, yeah, and they try to break the enemy formation, and in a short time, charging at it, and I'm like, what? No, they're binding the enemy, holding him off, so occupying him, that cavalry can actually outflank them and deciding the day. You're like, oh, so you see, the whole point of classification is to make it easier, to understandable, and without doing that, all people had to do the research. If I give a classification to you, like, oh, heavy infantry, and you have to ask questions, and so we have to go in detail. It doesn't make sense at all to declare them heavy infantry. In this short, like very like general example you saw, it was really pointless to call them heavy infantry because I had like two functionals, two combat roles, and also like two different ideas of as a tactical base for those armies, and you had to ask them out. You couldn't like just conclude it out of the term, but this is what classification terms are for. It's like the same with the classification term melee weapon and ranged weapon. We don't call them, swords, spears, this and everything. We don't explain how their weapon works. I say, oh, those used melee weapons, and you immediately know they used like weapons we already declared before as melee weapons, and weapons where you really had to have contact with the enemy. Even for a meter, but basically you are connected through the weapon with your target. While when we say ranged weapons, you know, okay, the weapon shoots, slings, or throws something, or the guy throws something, so he's basically not connected at all with the enemy. And this is what classification is for, and to use this tight and loose formation stuff is just pointless because you don't classify them anymore. Like I argued, you can't know them, what is their role, what they had to do on the battlefield. You wouldn't understand nothing at all about the army. It would be needed to go more in detail, and this is what you don't want with classification terms. So let us go forth to the second kind of definition, the second claim, that it's based on their equipment. So the Wikipedia article actually states that in this description, that heavy infantry are ground troops which are heavily armed and heavy armored, in opposing to light infantry and medium infantry. But I also have much bigger problems with that than actually with the tight formation stuff. So the first thing is, what does heavily armed mean in this context here? Does it refer to like the guys have many different weapons, or does it refer to they have like powerful weapons? This is actually like how we used heavily armed, and actually English and German, like they have kinda big caliber weapons. But you can see this can't be really used for Middle Ages or classical warfare, because a pike isn't necessarily a more powerful weapon than a one-handed spear or than a sword. And you know that also, this is also a reason why they had actually like different weapons back then, because one weapon couldn't just like overtake any other advantages of the other weapon. So this is the first thing. Another thing is, does it like refer to heavy weapon? We have this term also, heavy weapon, out there. But actually heavy weapons means something like a weapon which is not portable by the men themselves anymore. So it's like weapons which are bigger and require more men to use than like small weapons, which would be like rifles and pistols, and like light weapons, which would be like machine guns or mortars, stuff like this. So, and actually this definition you could use for Middle Ages and classical warfare, but then you would apply it to Scorpios, to cannons, or just to ballistas. So this is all not including infantry anymore. So this whole heavily armed stuff we can actually throw away. Okay, besides the equipped with different weapons maybe. But therefore also you just glance at the troops of the past and you see they all had like same amount of different weapons. Hoplites had spear, shield, dagger or knife, like a last resort sidearm, a sword. Knights had pole weapons, shields, depending on the time of course, and had a sidearm and dagger, or had even like two sidearms because they used maybe a warhammer or a mace and a sword as a sidearm. Then you look at phalangites, which had also pikes, little shields and swords. You look at legionaries or Celtic warriors, which both had basically shields, javelins, swords, daggers, spears, or both actually spears and a sword as a sidearm. So it doesn't make sense here. And this is the next question: how do we define like, oh, he's now heavy equipped, in the sense of from 6 weapon on you are heavy equipped? Which sense makes this? Like, how many commodores could he do additionally to this? So heavy armed is from the table, I would say. So let us look at heavy armored. This is also maybe a term you heard before, heavy armor. Everybody who played role-play games or video games actually would have heard of this. But funny thing is, heavy armor actually comes from tank warfare. Because in like the development, the evolution of tanks and of warfare around tanks, there were actually 3 terms used to classify them: light, medium and heavy. But this would also refer to different things depending on the context, like the gun size, the size of the tank itself, the thickness of armor, the combat role, the speed they could, the mobility basically. And so you see there's like not also much clarity, but actually when you heard the term heavy tank mostly refers often like to this Second World War types of tanks like Tigers, or like I think it was the T-36 or the T-38, I'm always confused I suppose, the Russian one, which were heavy tanks, and they are like defined as the tanks with the most powerful weapons and the thickest armor, but therefore on the cost of mobility and maneuverability. And basically role-playing games, when they were created, they actually took those terms over. You really see this. You have like the best armor available, which is like a full suit of plate, but you get like in role-playing games, video games, like big Mali for them. Like you get minus agility, minus reflex, minus I don't know initiative, stuff like that, minus speed. And yeah, you actually had some disadvantages, but not so extensive as like it were in tanks warfare. Really heavy tank were extremely slower than a light tank in like Second World War. But a guy in full plate armor wouldn't be necessarily like, oh, so much slower than other infantry. It definitely plays a role. So I actually think the term heavy armor is fine. It's okay to use to describe like the most protective armor of the context we're talking about, and it has of course draws some cost off your body because you have to carry more weight, you have to train with it and everything. So this is actually a fine definition. But does it matter, like the body armor, the type of it, to distinguish between different kind of infantry? I would say no. Wouldn't play so much of a role, not purely on the armor to distinguish them. Because I can give you 2 examples here. When the legion were facing the Macedonian phalanx at the Battle of Pydna, they both were basically heavy armored. They both had like the best protective armor of the day. The Romans had mail, the Phalangites had the linothoraxes, and both had like very good protection and flexibility. I would say the mail had like more advantages in form of flexibility and of coverage, but actually the linothorax would hold off better like thrusting weapons. You actually could see that in some tests. Just Google like linothorax testing. So you can say, okay, they're pretty even just from overall performance. And at the beginning of the battle, actually the Romans were at a huge disadvantage and were pushed back by the Phalangites through their long pikes and tight formation. They couldn't get through, they had to retreat further back. But then they came to uneven ground, and then the phalanx get gaps inside. So basically you had then holes in the formation where there were no spear. And the Romans actually wouldn't give up their tight formation because they were going into those gaps, and would then actually overwhelm the Phalangites and win the battle, just because they were get into the formation. So you see, both had heavy protection on them, both had swords. You can of course say, okay, the Romans had here another advantage, another weapon which gave them more defense, and this was a shield, a bigger shield. Yeah, this is also important here, but the body armor played such a little role here that I wouldn't actually say when like two heavy infantrymen would fight against each other and the body armor doesn't count for anything, is it then important, because obviously the shield was a big advantage, to distinguish between infantry which hadn't those armor and infantry which had? And the Romans fought also against Celts and Germanics which hadn't any body armor, and they had to really put their heavy troops in front and fight them, defend against them, and it wasn't just easy. They couldn't come in and slaughter them and now they don't wear body armor. So, but you can see it makes no really sense. And another example for that also, to like really convince you, the Swiss mercenaries, when they showed up in the late Middle Ages and they were plate armor around, they didn't had much armor, even none. And they would fight in like the mixed arms formations, tightly packed and everything, pikes, halberds and swords, stuff like that, and fire support, actually mostly with crossbows, the Swiss, not with firearms so much. And they were winning battle after battle against knight-based armies. So they were really like, it wouldn't matter at all, or it hadn't matter, that they didn't had body armor or not as much body armor. And they were actually like the dominant type of infantry, and other mercenaries like German Landsknechts, but also like in Spain and in Italy, like took over this system of the Swiss and also altered it or improved it, whatever, and they were really the most effective force out there. And knights which were actually not significant anymore for military, because they were just beaten in any regards by the well-organized infantry in form of mercenaries. So this is why I say it doesn't also matter to just purely distinguish between infantry or types of infantry just because of their body armor. So we can now conclude, when we just agree to all of it, I of course agree to it, so but if you also agree on it, so we can conclude that the explanations out there or the claims out there doesn't make any sense or are useless. So what should we do? Of course I thought about it beforehand. So the point is, how I suggest we should use the term heavy infantry. So heavy infantry means foot soldiers with a high defense, achieved through different combinations of equipment, so weapons, body armor, formation, tactics, fighting style, and therefore could fight, bind and endure the enemy. So, and with this definition we can easily classify infantry. I can look at the phalangites of the Macedonian army and say, okay, through their very long pikes, through their tight formation, they were, and of course through bonus armor like the small shields, the thorax, helmet stuff, they were capable of basically holding off any other form of melee infantry. So heavy infantry, they can fight against any kind of infantry in their context, of course. They could endure them, hold them off very long, therefore binding them. Of course the enemy has to deal with them. You can't just let them just run around and like everywhere into the backs of his own army. Same for Roman legionaries in any form. They had, through their big shields, through their tight formation order, of course also through their fighting style and the short weapon and everything, and through body armor, helmets and stuff, if body armor were available, they had also a high defensive, which allowed them to fight directly, so to fight the enemy, to endure him, to bind him. And if those, actually the Romans had more killing power than the phalangites, but this doesn't matter for definition. It's fine if we see then heavy infantry which also had a lot of killing power like the Romans. But this doesn't matter for definition. This is not like the basically combat role for heavy infantry. This is then when we can say, in this case, it also would kill their opponent. So, like I said, they have to fight against the enemy. It's not like they just have to endure him. They had also to fight him. And therefore, we can just easily look at any army, and I would say to you, okay, those guys here, you never heard of them before, of the terms, of the nation, of the language, of nothing heard of it. And I said to you, okay, this guys here were the heavy infantry. And you would know, okay. So this means they had good armor or a good formation, whatever, but they had a good defensive against other infantry, against other weapons and so on, and fighting styles, so they could like fight the enemy directly, could endure him, could bind him. So basically that also maybe other types of the army were protected or could do another thing like flanking them. And of course, I have to research it before. I have to go into a detailed look to the army and look at the equipment, at the context, what they're facing basically, and at the weapons and the formation to really determine, okay, those are the heavy infantry. But this is how classification works. This is how it's for. And basically I make a lot of research and also make an argument behind it and then classify them as heavy infantry. And I present to you here. This is the heavy infantry. You would know what I'm talking about. And if you're not convinced just by my word, you would then say, okay, why was they the heavy infantry? I mean, I can't see like big shields or so. I mean, this doesn't seem that they could be a high defensive, but I would then like put arguments out like, okay, but they had long spears and a very tight deep formation and also like a second row on each side with very big shields, so they already defended on each side. And then you would see, okay, I can agree, yeah, this makes them heavy infantry. So I think it's a lot better and makes a lot of more. Makes a lot of more would actually right. I can't English, but you see, it makes more sense. And you maybe guessed it. This is how I will use heavy infantry in the future. I will then, when I say heavy infantry, refer to infantry or foot soldiers with a high defense, for whatever reason, which could fight, bind, and endure the enemy. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if so, please give it a like. Let me know what you think about it. Maybe you have a good counter argument against it. I'm willing to discuss this whole matter here. And subscribe to my channel if you not already did. I talk here about military stuff, and hopefully see you soon.